The valley was silent except for the wind, the kind of silence that made experienced operators check their weapons twice. 6 Navy SEALs crouched in a dried riverbed along the Afghan-Pakistan border, surrounded by hostiles they couldn't see but knew were there. Their exfil had been compromised 3 hours ago. The helicopter that was supposed to pull them out had taken RPG fire and limped back to base trailing smoke. Now they were alone, low on ammunition, and waiting for something they'd been told was coming. Something with a call sign that made the younger guys smirk. Ghostfire. The senior chief, a man named Rourke with 22 years in, had worked with A-10 pilots before. He didn't smirk. He checked his watch and scanned the ridge line where muzzle flashes had appeared intermittently for the past hour. The enemy was probing, testing, waiting for full darkness to overrun their position. Close air support was their only chance, but the bird they'd been promised was still 40 minutes out according to the last transmission. 40 minutes they probably didn't have. Then Rourke's radio crackled. A woman's voice, calm as Sunday morning with an accent that suggested somewhere in the Appalachians. Cutlass 2-6, this is Ghostfire. I'm 15 mics out with a full combat load. Give me coordinates and target description. We'll get you home. One of the younger SEALs, a kid from California named Webb, muttered something about women drivers. Rourke shot him a look that could stop a charging bull. He'd heard that voice before, years ago, on a different operation that had gone sideways. He keyed his radio with hands that had stayed steady through 3 deployments but trembled slightly now, though not from fear. Ghostfire, Cutlass 2-6. We are danger close to multiple concentrations of enemy fighters. Estimate 40 to 60 hostiles in prepared positions along ridge line bearing 270 from our pose. We are Winchester on grenades and down to last mags. Need immediate fire mission. There was a pause, not hesitation, calculation. Then that voice again, carrying something that sounded like recognition. Copy all, Cutlass. I've got your beacon. 15 minutes. Keep your heads down and mark your position with IR. And Rourke, if that's you down there, you still owe me a beer from Helmand. Webb's smirk vanished. The senior chief allowed himself the smallest smile despite their situation. It's me, Captain, still keeping terrible company. Some things never change. Ghostfire out. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that appeared on the horizon 14 minutes later wasn't flying like anything Webb had seen before. The aircraft came in low, hugging the terrain with a precision that suggested the pilot knew every fold and shadow of the landscape. The distinctive profile of the Warthog was unmistakable even in the dimming light. The twin engines mounted high on the fuselage, the straight wings designed for low-speed maneuverability, and that massive GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon protruding from the nose like the tusk of some prehistoric predator. The plane was painted in standard Air Force gray, but someone had added nose art near the cockpit. Even from a distance, Rourke could make out the stylized flames and the word Ghostfire in letters that seemed to flicker. Captain Mara Kozlov had been flying A-10s for 12 years. Before that, she'd flown helicopters in the Army medical evacuation missions that had earned her a Distinguished Flying Cross and a reputation for flying into places other pilots wouldn't even consider. She'd switched branches and airframes after her 3rd tour, seeking something with more teeth, something that could protect people like the wounded soldiers she'd extracted from impossible situations. The A-10 had been a perfect fit. Tonight she was alone, her wingman grounded by mechanical issues, carrying the full weight of this mission on her shoulders. The same shoulders that had carried her through countless briefings where senior officers questioned her tactics, her judgment, her presence. She'd learned to let the work speak for itself. The Warthog's targeting pod was already painting the ridge line. The SEAL's IR strobe appeared on her display, a tiny beacon of friendly forces in a sea of potential threats. She studied the terrain through her heads-up display, noting the elevation changes, the likely positions of enemy fighters, the danger-close proximity of the friendlies. This would require precision. The GAU-8 could fire 70 rounds per second of 30-depleted uranium ammunition. In the wrong hands or with the wrong approach, that much firepower this close to friendlies was a recipe for catastrophe. Mara's hands on the stick were steady. She'd done this before. She keyed her radio. Cutlass 2-6, Ghostfire is commencing gun run. Rounds will impact 100 meters west of your position. Recommend you get small and stay small. Rourke's voice came back immediately. Roger, Ghostfire. We're already small as we can get. You're cleared hot. The A-10 banked hard, the airframe groaning slightly under the G-forces as Mara lined up her approach. Through her canopy she could see muzzle flashes along the ridge now, the enemy fighters growing bolder as darkness fell. They had no idea what was about to hit them. She adjusted her angle of attack, compensating for wind and elevation, her eyes flickering between the HUD and the visual references outside. The Warthog responded to her inputs like an extension of her own body, an aircraft that felt less like a machine and more like a partner in the violence about to unfold. At 1,500 feet she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 erupted with a sound that troops on the ground described as a dragon's roar crossed with a chainsaw from hell. The entire aircraft shuddered as the cannon spat death at 70 rounds per second, the recoil actually slowing the plane's forward momentum. Bright tracers reached down from the sky like the finger of an angry god. The 30 rounds impacted along the ridgeline with devastating precision, each one capable of punching through concrete or turning human bodies into pink mist. Secondary explosions erupted as ammunition caches and RPG rounds cooked off. The enemy fire that had been steadily increasing suddenly went silent. Not reduced, silent. Mara pulled up hard, banking to come around for another pass. Her eyes scanned the darkness for threats. These mountains were known for MANPADS shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles that could ruin an A-10 pilot's whole day. The Warthog was tough, built to take punishment with redundant systems and a titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit, but it wasn't invincible. She armed her countermeasures, ready to deploy flares at the first sign of a missile launch. Below, Rourke and his team watched in something approaching awe as the ridge line that had been preparing to overrun them was systematically dismantled. The younger SEALs, including Webb, stared at the sky where Ghostfire was already banking for another run. This wasn't the wild spray and pray they'd expected. This was surgical, artistic even. Rourke keyed his radio. Ghostfire, Cutlass. That was right on target. We've got movement breaking contact to the north. Looks like squirters trying to reposition. Mara's voice came back, still preternaturally calm. I see them. Switching to rockets. 30 seconds. The A-10 carried Hydra 70 rockets in pods under its wings, unguided but devastatingly effective when employed by a pilot who knew how to use them. Mara did. She'd spent countless hours on the range, learning the ballistics, understanding how wind and altitude affected trajectory. She lined up on the fleeing fighters, leading them slightly, calculating in her head faster than any computer. The rockets launched with bright flashes, trailing smoke as they arced downward. They impacted in a line across the enemy's retreat path, cutting off escape and sowing chaos. More secondary explosions, more silence. The enemy had walked into these mountains expecting to overwhelm a small team of Americans and walk away with a propaganda victory. Instead, they'd encountered something they couldn't fight, couldn't even see clearly. Just death from above, delivered with uncanny accuracy by a pilot whose gender they didn't know and whose face they'd never see. Mara brought the Warthog around for a third pass, but the valley was quiet now. The enemy fighters who'd survived were either dead, wounded, or scattered into the mountains with no desire to continue the engagement. She circled overhead, her eyes scanning for any remaining threats, the A-10's turbofan engines producing their distinctive whine. Cutlass 2-6, Ghostfire. Valley appears clear. I'm going to orbit overhead while you consolidate and prepare for exfil. Your ride is inbound, ETA 25 minutes. There was a longer pause before Rourke responded. When he did, his voice carried something that SEALs rarely expressed, genuine gratitude mixed with respect. Copy that, Ghostfire. And Captain, that was some of the finest close air support I've seen in 22 years. You just saved 6 lives. Mara felt the familiar warmth that came with knowing she'd done her job, done it well and brought people home. But she kept her voice professional. Just another day at the office, Senior Chief. That beer's going to cost you double now, though. She heard laughter over the radio. Real laughter, the kind that came from men who just had the universe's biggest weight lifted off their shoulders. Webb, the young SEAL who'd made the crack about women drivers, was staring at the sky with a new expression. Something between embarrassment and admiration. Rourke noticed and allowed himself a small smile. "You got something you want to say, Webb?" The younger man shook his head slowly. "No, Senior Chief, I think I'm good. Probably wise." Above them, Ghostfire continued her orbit, a guardian angel with teeth. The A-10 caught the last rays of sunlight on its wings, turning the gray aircraft momentarily golden. Mara ran through her checks, monitoring fuel and ammunition, calculating how long she could stay on station. The answer was as long as needed. 23 minutes later, a rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon, escorted by 2 Apache gunships. Mara identified them on her radio, confirmed the pickup zone was clear, and watched as the SEALs were extracted with professional efficiency. Only when the rescue bird was safely away, heading back to base with all 6 operators aboard, did she finally turn Ghostfire toward home. The flight back gave her time to think, to remember. The A-10 had always been controversial in Air Force circles. Too slow, critics said. Too vulnerable to modern air defenses. Too specialized for an era that demanded multi-role fighters. There'd been multiple attempts to retire the entire fleet, to replace the Warthog with faster, sleeker aircraft that looked better in promotional materials and cost 3 times as much. Each time, the troops on the ground had revolted, because the troops knew what the PowerPoint warriors in the Pentagon didn't. When you were bleeding in the dirt with hostiles closing in, you didn't want some supersonic fighter screaming by at 30,000 feet. You wanted the Warthog. You wanted that distinctive sound of the GAU-8. You wanted a pilot who could see you, who could put rounds on target meters from your position, who would stay low and slow and vulnerable to keep you alive. Mara had chosen the A-10 specifically because it was the aircraft nobody else seemed to want. The plane that didn't get the glory or the magazine covers. The ugly, beloved beast that just worked. She'd faced skepticism from day one, not just because of her gender, though that was always there, hanging in the air like humidity, but because she'd come from the Army, from helicopters, because she approached tactics differently than pilots who'd grown up in the fighter community. She'd had to prove herself over and over, in training exercises and then in combat. Each mission was a test. Each successful gun run was evidence. Each soldier brought home alive was an argument she didn't have to make with words. The base appeared ahead, lights marking runways in the darkness. Mara contacted the tower, received clearance, and brought the Warthog in for a textbook landing. The A-10 touched down with barely a bump, the landing gear absorbing the impact with robust simplicity. She taxied to her assigned spot, went through the shutdown procedures with the same attention to detail she brought to everything, and finally climbed out of the cockpit. The crew chief who met her was a staff sergeant named Kowalski, a man who'd been maintaining A-10s since before Mara had graduated high school. He looked the aircraft over with a practiced eye, noting the empty rocket pods and the brass casings that would need to be cleared from the gun system. "How'd she do, Captain?" Mara patted the Warthog's fuselage with genuine affection. "Perfect, as always. She's got some carbon scoring we'll want to clean, and I'll need a full combat load for tomorrow's sortie, but she flew like a dream." Kowalski nodded, making notes on his tablet. He'd seen plenty of pilots come through, some who treated the A-10 like a bus to be tolerated, others who understood what they had. Captain Kozlov was in the latter category. He'd watched her pre-flight inspections, seen how she knew every rivet and panel, how she could diagnose issues by sound alone. The Warthog responded to that kind of attention. Aircraft always did. "I'll have her ready by 0600, ma'am. Get some rest." Mara headed to the squadron building for debrief. The operations officer, a lieutenant colonel named Marcus Vance, was waiting with the intelligence team. The debrief was thorough, covering every aspect of the mission from initial contact to final departure. Mara walked them through her decision-making process, the targeting considerations, the danger close calculations. She was precise in her language, factual in her descriptions. When she mentioned the SEAL's situation and her response, Vance nodded slowly. He'd read the preliminary reports, seen the gun camera footage. The precision she demonstrated was exceptional even by A-10 standards. "The senior chief on the ground is putting you in for a commendation," Vance said. "Says you saved his team when no one else could have gotten there in time." Mara shrugged slightly. "I was doing my job, sir. The A-10 made it possible. Right aircraft, right place, right time." Vance studied her for a moment. Captain Kozlov wasn't prone to false modesty, but she also didn't grandstand. She let the work speak. That was rare in an Air Force that sometimes rewarded volume over substance. "Your wingman's bird will be back up tomorrow. You've got another tasking further north. Intel suggests there's a Taliban commander moving through the area. If we can interdict him, it'll disrupt their operations for months." Mara nodded. "I'll be ready, sir." After the debrief, she headed to her quarters. The accommodation was Spartan, as befitted a forward operating base. Cot, footlocker, a small desk with a laptop. She sat down and opened the computer, intending to write her after-action report while details were fresh. Instead, she found herself looking at a photo on her desktop. Her father, 25 years ago, standing beside an A-10 in Desert Storm. He'd been a captain then too, flying close air support missions during the ground war. He'd told her stories growing up, about the highway of death, about danger-close missions, about the satisfaction of protecting troops on the ground. He'd also told her it was a hard road for a woman in military aviation, that she'd face challenges he never had. He'd asked her if she was sure if she was ready for that. She'd said yes. She'd meant it. Her father had been gone for 5 years now, a heart attack at 59. Too young, but that was how it went sometimes. She'd been flying the A-10 for 7 years when he died, already building the reputation that had led to her call sign. Ghostfire had come from a mission in Syria before the withdrawal, when she'd appeared out of a dust storm to obliterate an ISIS convoy that had pinned down a special forces team. One of the operators had said afterward that she'd seemed like a ghost made of fire, materializing from nothing to rain hell and then vanishing again. The name stuck. She liked it. It suggested something ethereal but dangerous, something that couldn't be pinned down or predicted. Her father would have liked it too. Mara finished her report, sent it up the chain, and lay back on her cot. Sleep would come eventually. It always did. She'd learned long ago how to compartmentalize, how to separate the violence of combat from the person she was off the battlefield. It was a survival skill, as necessary as knowing how to read a targeting display or manage your fuel load. But tonight, before sleep came, she thought about Senior Chief Rourke and his team. Thought about Webb, the young SEAL who'd had his assumptions challenged. Thought about all the times she'd had to challenge assumptions, had to prove that competence wasn't gendered, that skill was skill regardless of who possessed it. She thought about the A-10, the ugly beautiful bird that kept defying predictions of its demise. Maybe that was why she'd always felt such kinship with the warthog. Both of them were constantly underestimated. Both of them kept showing up and doing the work. Both of them saved lives while the critics wrote think pieces about their obsolescence. Mara closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring another mission, another opportunity to do the job she'd trained for, to protect the people who needed protecting, to fly the airplane nobody else wanted but everybody needed. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Mara was in the Squadron Operations Center by 0530, reviewing the intelligence briefing for the day's mission. The Taliban commander they were after was a man named Hamid Kadiri, responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. He traveled with a security element, usually 4 to 6 vehicles, and tended to move in the early morning or late evening. The intelligence fusion cell had been tracking his communications, building a pattern of life that suggested he'd be moving today through a specific valley in the northern part of their area of operations. If they could catch him in transit, away from civilian populations, it would be a clean strike. The kind of mission that made a real difference in the ground campaign. Mara's wingman for the day was a captain named Tyler Brooks, a capable pilot with 4 years in the A-10 community. He was younger than Mara by 7 years, newer to combat operations but solid in his tactical execution. They'd flown together a dozen times. He respected her, which was more than could be said for some pilots she'd been paired with over the years. The brief was straightforward. They'd orbit in a holding pattern until intelligence confirmed Kadiri's movement, then move to interdict. Rules of engagement were clearly defined. Positive identification required. Civilian considerations paramount. They walked to their aircraft in the pre-dawn darkness. The crew chiefs had both warthogs ready, fully armed and fueled. Mara did her walk-around inspection with the thoroughness of someone who understood that pre-flight wasn't just a checklist. It was a conversation with the machine that would keep you alive. Every panel, every surface, every control checked and rechecked. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and began the startup sequence. The A-10's engines spooled up with their characteristic whine. Systems came online green across the board. She ran through the checklist with practiced efficiency, checking flight controls, weapons systems, avionics. Everything responded as it should. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Mara advanced the throttles and felt the Warthog accelerate down the runway. Despite its ungainly appearance on the ground, the A-10 was surprisingly nimble once airborne. She rotated at the calculated speed and felt the gear leave the pavement. They climbed out heading north, Brooks in formation off her right wing. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with orange and pink. Below them, the Afghan landscape unfolded in shades of brown and tan, ancient mountains carved by millennia of wind and weather. The valleys and ridges told stories of armies that had come before. Alexander's forces, British expeditions, Soviet divisions, and now American units, all trying to impose order on terrain that resisted such things. Mara had studied the history during her first deployment. She understood what they were doing here was part of a much longer story, one that probably wouldn't end the way anyone planned. But understanding the big picture didn't change the immediate mission. Today was about stopping one man who'd caused the deaths of too many innocents. They reached their holding pattern and began orbiting, 2 A-10s circling in the morning sky like patient predators. Mara monitored multiple radio frequencies, staying current on the tactical picture. Ground forces were active in several locations. An army patrol here, a special forces element there, all of them pieces on a vast chessboard. Her role was to be ready when needed. An hour passed, then 2. That was how combat operations went sometimes. Long periods of waiting punctuated by moments of intense action. Mara stayed focused, staying hydrated, monitoring her fuel, running through contingencies in her mind. Then the call came, not from their intelligence cell but from a ground unit in contact. Any air assets in sector, this is Havoc 2-1. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions, 1 vehicle disabled, 2 wounded. Request immediate close air support. Mara checked her display. The call was coming from a position about 40 kilometers from their current location. She keyed the radio. Havoc 2-1, this is Ghostfire flight of 2 A-10s. We can be overhead in 6 minutes. Send coordinates and situation report. The voice that came back was tight with stress but professional. A lieutenant, probably. Young but keeping it together. Ghostfire, Havoc 2-1. We are a convoy of 4 MRAPs, ambushed in canyon approximately 2 clicks north of waypoint Delta 7. Effective fire from both sides of the canyon, possible PKM machine guns and RPGs. We've got wounded who need casevac but cannot extract until fire is suppressed. Mara was already banking toward the coordinates, Brooks following her lead. Roger, Havoc, Ghostfire flight is inbound. Keep your heads down. We'll take care of it. 6 minutes at the A-10's cruising speed. 6 minutes during which the soldiers in those vehicles would be taking fire, bleeding, wondering if help would arrive in time. Mara pushed the throttles forward slightly, trading fuel efficiency for speed. The additional fuel burn was worth it. The Warthog accelerated, eating up distance with determined purpose. She studied the terrain ahead through her targeting systems. The canyon the lieutenant had described was visible on her display, a narrow defile running east to west between 2 ridges. Classic ambush geography. Taliban fighters loved these positions because they could fire from elevated positions while the targets were channeled into kill zones below. But canyon ambushes had a fatal flaw when close air support was available. The same ridges that gave the ambushers advantage also trapped them with limited escape routes. Mara called up the gun camera feed and armed her weapon systems. "Brooks, this is Kozlov. When we arrive on station, you take the north ridge, I'll take south. Guns first to suppress, then rockets on any vehicles or fortified positions. Watch your angles, friendlies are in the valley floor." "Copy, Ghostfire lead. North ridge, guns then rockets. Watching friendlies." The canyon appeared ahead. Mara could see the four MRAPs stopped in a defensive formation, smoke rising from one. Muzzle flashes flickered from both ridges. She marked the friendly positions on her display and identified the enemy firing points. At least 8 separate locations, possibly more. A well-planned ambush by an experienced enemy. They were about to get a harsh lesson in the capabilities of modern close air support. Mara brought the A-10 down lower, below the rim of the canyon ridges. Dangerous flying, but it gave her better angles on the enemy positions. The Warthog responded to her inputs with smooth precision, banking hard into the canyon. She could see the MRAPs clearly now, the soldiers taking cover behind the vehicles. Havoc 2-1, Ghostfire is in position, commencing gun runs. Danger close, keep everyone behind armor. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The GAU-8 roared to life, tracers reaching down to impact the south ridge where a machine gun position had been firing on the convoy. The 30 rounds chewed through rock and sandbags with equal efficiency. The machine gun went silent permanently. She pulled up, banking hard, and watched as Brooks made his run on the north ridge. His execution was textbook, placing rounds exactly where they needed to be. Another enemy position eliminated. The remaining Taliban fighters began breaking contact, realizing they'd lost their advantage. Mara switched to rockets and walked them along the south ridge, hitting a technical truck that had been hidden behind rocks. The vehicle exploded in a fireball that sent secondary explosions rippling across the ridge. Within 4 minutes of arriving on station, the ambush was over. The enemy fighters were dead, fled, or pinned down ineffectively. Mara established an orbit overhead while Brooks covered the other side. Havoc 2-1 Ghostfire, Valley is clear for your casevac. Medical bird is inbound from the south, ETA 12 minutes. The lieutenant's voice came back, and this time the stress was replaced with relief. Ghostfire, Havoc 2-1. I don't know who you are, but you just saved our whole convoy. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Mara kept her response professional. Just doing our job, Havoc. Get your wounded taken care of. We'll stay overhead until the medical bird has you extracted. She stayed true to her word, maintaining overwatch until a medevac helicopter arrived and collected the wounded. Only then did she and Brooks resume their original tasking, heading back to the northern sector to await word on the Taliban commander. The delay had cost them time and fuel. They'd need to hit a tanker soon to top off and extend their on-station time. Mara coordinated with an Air Force KC-135 tanker orbiting to the west. Aerial refueling in an A-10 required focus and steady hands. The refueling basket trailed from the tanker on a long hose, and the pilot had to fly the A-10's refueling probe into the basket and maintain position while fuel transferred. Mara had done it hundreds of times. She slid into position behind the tanker, matched speed, and eased the probe forward until it connected with a solid thunk. Fuel began flowing. She held position rock steady, watching her fuel gauge climb. Brooks refueled after her, and they headed back to their assigned sector, tanks full and ready for whatever came next. What came next was the call they'd been waiting for. Intelligence had confirmed movement. Hamid Kadiri's convoy was in transit, heading through a valley that was kilometers from any civilian population. Perfect conditions for a strike. Mara received the coordinates and studied the video feed from a high-altitude surveillance asset. 6 vehicles, moving fast, trying to reach a compound before daylight fully exposed them. This was the shot they'd been waiting for. She armed her weapons and checked her targeting systems. The rules of engagement were clear. Positive identification of Kadiri's vehicle. No civilians in the impact area. Proportional force. All boxes could be checked. She looked at the video feed one more time, confirming what she was seeing matched the intelligence picture. The lead vehicle in the convoy matched the description perfectly. A white Toyota Hilux with a mounted machine gun, exactly what Kadiri's security element used. The command vehicle would be second in the convoy, a black Land Cruiser with reinforced panels. Intelligence had photos of that specific vehicle. It was there, second in line, exactly where it should be. Mara calculated the geometry. The convoy was moving through a valley with steep sides, traveling on a dirt road that wound between rocky outcroppings. If she timed it right, she could hit the lead vehicle first to stop the convoy, then walk fire down the line before they could disperse. Surgical, efficient, final. She keyed her radio. "Brooks, I'm taking the shot. Cover the egress routes in case anyone bolts from the vehicles." "Roger, lead. I've got the south exit covered." Mara banked into her attack run, lining up the lead vehicle in her sights. The A-10 responded to her touch with mechanical grace, every system working in perfect harmony. She had a moment of crystalline focus, the kind that came when training and experience merged into instinct. The target was centered, wind calculated, elevation adjusted. She fired. The GAU-8 spoke its violent language, rounds reaching down to impact the lead vehicle with devastating precision. The Hilux disintegrated, stopping the convoy instantly. The other vehicles tried to scatter, drivers realizing too late they were under attack. Mara adjusted her aim and fired again, hitting the black Land Cruiser. The vehicle exploded as ammunition inside cooked off. She pulled up, banking to come around for another pass, but it wasn't necessary. The convoy was destroyed. 6 vehicles burning, no survivors visible. The video feed from the surveillance asset confirmed what her eyes told her. Mission accomplished. She circled overhead, documenting the strike, recording the scene for battle damage assessment. Somewhere in one of those burning vehicles was Hamid Kadiri, a man responsible for dozens of attacks, hundreds of casualties. He wouldn't be planning any more operations. Mara felt no triumph, no joy. Just the quiet satisfaction of a difficult job done correctly, of removing a threat to coalition forces and Afghan civilians. The flight back to base was quiet. She and Brooks maintained formation, conserving fuel, monitoring radios. The morning sun was well up now, illuminating the mountains in harsh light that revealed every scar and shadow. When they landed, the debrief was already waiting. Intelligence wanted confirmation, details, anything she could provide. Mara walked them through the engagement methodically, providing the video evidence, explaining her targeting decisions. The battle damage assessment would take time, but the preliminary evidence was clear. The strike had been successful. That evening, Mara sat in the small base chapel, something she did after difficult missions. She wasn't particularly religious, but the space provided quiet, and quiet was valuable. She'd taken lives today. Lives that needed taking according to the rules of war and the mission she'd been assigned. But they were still lives, still people who'd woken up that morning not knowing it was their last day. She didn't second-guess her actions, didn't regret the strike, but she acknowledged the weight of it, the responsibility that came with the power she wielded. That acknowledgement was important. It kept her human, kept her connected to the moral dimensions of what she did. A chaplain, an older captain named Morrison, sat down beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just offered his presence. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Rough day, Captain," Mara considered the question. "Successful day, but yeah, rough in its own way." Morrison nodded. He'd counseled a lot of pilots, understood what they carried. "Want to talk about it?" "Not really, but thank you for asking." "The offer stands, anytime." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Captain, the work you do saves lives. I know that's not always enough to make it easy, but it's true. You protect the protectors." Mara looked up at him. "The protectors need protecting. That's a sad thing when you think about it." Morrison smiled sadly. "It is, but that's why we need people like you, people willing to carry that weight." After he left, Mara sat in the silence for another few minutes. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and walked back out into the Afghan evening. Tomorrow would bring more missions, more decisions, more moments where her skill and judgment would determine who lived and died. She'd be ready. She was always ready. That was her job. That was her calling. That was why she flew the A-10 instead of sitting behind a desk somewhere safe. Because protection mattered. Because the troops on the ground deserved someone overhead who could save them when everything went wrong. Because the warthog, ugly and unloved and perpetually on the chopping block, was the best tool for that job. And because she was damn good at flying it. 3 weeks later, Mara found herself back at Bagram Airfield for a brief stand-down. Her squadron was rotating in fresh pilots while the combat veterans got 72 hours to decompress. It wasn't much, but it was something. A chance to sleep more than 4 hours straight, to eat food that didn't come in a pouch, to maybe video call family back home. She was in the base exchange, browsing for nothing in particular when she heard her call sign. Ghostfire, Captain Kozlov. She turned to find Senior Chief Rourke standing there, looking slightly uncomfortable in the retail environment, like a wolf that had wandered into a pet store by mistake. He was older than she remembered, more gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, assessing kind. "Senior Chief, didn't expect to see you here," Rourke smiled. "My team's staging out of Bagram for our next rotation. When I heard your squadron was here, I had to track you down. That beer I owe you, remember?" They found a table in the dining facility, relatively private by Bagram standards, and Rourke bought them both coffee since beer wasn't available on base. They talked for a while about mutual acquaintances, about the war, about nothing in particular. Then Rourke got serious. "I wanted to thank you in person for what you did out there. My team, we've worked with a lot of pilots over the years. What you did that night was in the top tier, maybe the best close air support I've ever seen." Mara deflected with characteristic modesty. "You gave me good coordinates and clear communication, made my job easy." "Bullshit, Captain." Rourke said it with a smile, but there was steel underneath. "We both know that was anything but easy. Danger close in failing light against an enemy in prepared positions. Most pilots would have asked for more standoff, more separation between us and the targets. You came in low and you were surgical. That takes skill and nerve." Mara sipped her coffee. "The A-10 makes it possible. Right tool for the job. Maybe, but tools don't fly themselves. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a competent pilot and an exceptional one. You're the latter." There was a pause. Then Rourke continued, his voice quieter. "Can I tell you something? One of my guys, Webb, the kid who made that crack about women drivers before you arrived, he hasn't stopped talking about you since. Tells everyone who'll listen about the pilot who saved us. Doesn't mention gender anymore, just talks about skill." Mara smiled slightly. "Personal growth, it happens." "Yeah, but it matters. My generation, we grew up in a military that was transitioning, still a lot of old attitudes. The next generation, Webb's generation, they're learning different lessons. They're seeing competence demonstrated in ways that challenge old assumptions. That's important. You're part of that teaching, whether you meant to be or not." Mara considered this. She'd never set out to be a symbol or a teacher. She just wanted to fly, to be good at her job, to make a difference. But she understood what Rourke was saying. Like it or not, every woman in military aviation carried additional weight. Every mission was both the mission and a statement about capability. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was reality. "I just fly the aircraft, Senior Chief. Everything else is other people's interpretation." Rourke nodded. "Fair enough. But I wanted you to know, from someone who's been in the fight for a long time, what you do matters, and not just the tactical impact. The example you set, the way you operate, it matters." They talked for another half hour, then Rourke had to leave to join his team for a briefing. Before he left, he shook her hand with the grip of someone who meant it. "Stay safe up there, Captain, and if you ever need anything, ever, you reach out. You've got a lot of people in the special operations community who remember what you did. That counts for something." After he left, Mara sat alone with her coffee, thinking about the conversation. She'd spent so much time focused on the tactical level, on each mission and each engagement, that she sometimes lost sight of the broader picture. The way her actions rippled outward, affecting not just the people she directly saved, but the perceptions and attitudes of those around them. It was a lot to carry. But she'd carry it. That was the job. Later that day, she video called her mother in West Virginia. Angela Kozlov was in her early 60s, a retired nurse who'd spent 30 years in hospital emergency rooms. She'd raised Mara alone after her husband's death, supported her daughter's decision to join the military even when she worried every day about the risks. "You look tired, sweetheart," her mother said, her face pixelated on the screen but her concern clear. "I'm okay, Mom. Just been busy. I saw the news about that Taliban commander. They said an airstrike got him. Was that you?" Mara had learned long ago not to discuss specific operations with family, even in general terms. OPSEC, operational security, was drilled into every service member from day one. But her mother was smart enough to read between the lines. "I can't talk about specific missions, Mom, you know that." Angela nodded. "I know, but I worry. Your father used to tell me not to worry either, and look where that got him." There was old pain in those words. Mara's father had survived 2 wars and countless combat missions, only to die of a heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning. The randomness of it had devastated her mother in ways the war never had. At least with war there was meaning, purpose. A heart attack in the suburbs was just cruel chance. "I'm careful, Mom, I promise." "Careful doesn't always matter, Mara, but I trust you. Your father trusted you too. Before he died, he told me you were a better pilot than he ever was. Said you had instincts that couldn't be taught." Mara felt emotion tighten her throat. Her father had never said that to her directly. Hearing it now, secondhand, years after his death, hit differently than it would have if he'd told her himself. "He said that. He did. He was proud of you, so proud. And I am too, even when I'm scared for you." They talked about other things after that. Home, family, the small dramas of civilian life that seemed simultaneously trivial and precious. When the call ended, Mara sat in her quarters feeling the familiar mixture of connection and isolation that came with military service. Connected to her mother by love and history, isolated by the experiences she couldn't share, the things she'd seen and done that couldn't be explained to someone who'd never been in combat. The next morning, her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Vance, called her into his office. She reported formally, standing at attention until he told her to sit. Vance was a career A-10 pilot, someone who'd flown the Warthog for 15 years and understood the aircraft and its mission better than anyone Mara had met. He was fair, demanding, and completely uninterested in politics or posturing. He cared about results. "Captain Kozlov, I wanted to give you a heads up. That commendation Senior Chief Rourke put you in for is getting upgraded. You're being recommended for a Distinguished Flying Cross for the mission 3 weeks ago. The Army is also putting you in for an Air Medal with Valor for the convoy rescue." Mara processed this information. The Distinguished Flying Cross was a significant award given for heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. She'd seen other pilots receive it, respected what it represented, but she'd never flown for awards. The recognition felt strange, like praise for breathing or walking. "Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but I was just doing my job." Vance smiled. "That's what everyone says when they're recommended for awards. But here's the thing, Captain. What you did on that mission went beyond normal job execution. You were alone, unsupported, facing a danger-close scenario in degraded conditions. You executed perfectly under pressure. That's not just doing your job, that's doing your job at the highest possible level. The awards are recognition of that." Mara nodded, accepting his perspective even if she didn't fully share it. "Yes, sir, thank you." "There's something else," Vance continued. "Your profile is getting higher. That's both good and bad. Good because it brings positive attention to the A-10 community at a time when we're still fighting for the aircraft's survival. Bad because it makes you a symbol, and symbols carry weight beyond their tactical contributions." He paused, studying her. "How do you feel about that?" Mara considered the question carefully. "Honestly, sir, I'd rather just fly. I'm not comfortable with the symbol thing, but I understand the reality. If my being good at my job helps protect the A-10 program, then I can live with the attention. The aircraft matters more than my comfort level." Vance nodded approvingly. "That's the right answer. The A-10 is facing another round of retirement discussions in Congress. There are people in the Pentagon who look at spreadsheets and see an old airframe that costs money. They don't see what you and I see, what the troops on the ground see. So yes, we're going to use success stories like yours to make the case. Not because we're exploiting you, but because the truth of what the Warthog can do needs to be told. I understand, sir. Whatever helps the mission. Good. Now you've got another 48 hours of downtime. Use them. Rest. Reset. When you get back to your forward operating base, we're going to need you sharp. The operational tempo isn't slowing down. Mara spent the rest of her downtime in quiet activities. She went to the base gym and ran until her legs burned, chasing the endorphins that came with physical exhaustion. She read a novel, something her father had recommended years ago that she'd never gotten around to, a thriller about submarine warfare that had nothing to do with her current reality and was perfect because of it. She wrote in a journal she kept, not a detailed operational diary, but something more personal. Thoughts, reflections, the things she couldn't articulate in official reports. The writing helped her process, helped her maintain perspective. On the second night, she attended an informal gathering in the squadron building. Other pilots, crew chiefs, intelligence personnel, all unwinding in the way military personnel do, with bad coffee and mediocre stories and camaraderie that came from shared purpose. Captain Tyler Brooks, her wingman from the recent missions, was holding court with a story about a training mission gone wrong. He was animated, funny, turning a near disaster into comedy through the alchemy of time and survival. When he finished and the laughter died down, someone asked Mara about her first combat mission in the A-10. She rarely told the story, but tonight in this company, she felt inclined to share. My first real close air support mission was in Syria, before the big withdrawal. I'd done training deployments, flown combat air patrols, but never been called in to support troops in direct contact. When the call came, I was scared. Not of dying, though that was part of it, scared of failing, scared of not being good enough when people's lives depended on me. The room had gone quiet. People were listening. The team on the ground was pinned down by an ISIS position. They needed immediate suppression. I came in probably faster than I should have, adrenaline overriding some of my training. Made my first gun run and missed left by about 10 meters. Not enough to endanger the friendlies, but enough to be embarrassing. I could hear the disappointment in the ground controller's voice when he corrected my aim. She paused, remembering. But here's the thing about the A-10. It's forgiving, stable, built for multiple passes. So I came around, made the adjustment, and put the second burst exactly where it needed to be. The ISIS position went silent. The troops got out safely, and I learned something important about combat that training can't really teach you. "What's that?" someone asked. Mara smiled slightly. "That perfection isn't required. Competence is, persistence is, the willingness to adjust and try again. Nobody gets it right every time. The measure of a pilot isn't whether they ever miss, it's whether they can correct and complete the mission." There were nods around the room. Everyone there had faced similar moments, times when the ideal met the real and compromises had to be made. What mattered was the outcome, the mission accomplished despite imperfection. Tyler Brooks raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To persistent competence, the unofficial motto of the A-10 community. Others joined him. To persistent competence. Mara raised her own cup, appreciating the moment. This was what she'd miss most when she eventually left the military. Not the adrenaline of combat or the recognition of awards, but this. The community of people who understood what you did, who'd been where you'd been, who didn't need explanations because they'd lived it themselves. The next day she returned to her forward operating base, ready to resume operations. The aircraft was waiting, Ghostfire painted on the nose, the A-10 looking simultaneously ungainly and purposeful in the Afghan sunlight. Kowalski, her crew chief, had the bird ready. Full combat load, every system checked and rechecked. Mara did her pre-flight inspection with the same attention she always brought, then climbed into the cockpit. The familiar space welcomed her. This was where she belonged. Not in briefing rooms or award ceremonies. Here, with the stick in her hand and the sky ahead doing the work that mattered. She started the engines and felt the Warthog come to life beneath her. The tower cleared her for takeoff. She advanced the throttles and felt the acceleration, the moment when the aircraft left the Earth and became something more than the sum of its parts. Airborne, heading north toward the area of operations, she checked in with various command elements. updated her tactical picture. Prepared for whatever the day would bring, her radio crackled, a ground unit in contact requesting close air support. Different day, same mission. She banked toward the coordinates, the responding with mechanical precision. Below, someone needed help. Above, Ghostfire was coming. That was the job, that was the purpose. Everything else was just noise. The mission that day was routine in the sense that anything in combat can be routine. A Taliban patrol had engaged an Afghan National Army checkpoint. The ANA soldiers were holding their own but needed support to break contact and reposition. Mara arrived overhead, assessed the situation, and delivered precision fire that allowed the friendly forces to withdraw safely. No American casualties. No civilian casualties. Mission successful. She returned to base as the sun was setting, the mountains casting long shadows across the valleys. The days after action reports were filed, the aircraft was serviced, and she joined her squadron mates for dinner in the dining facility. It was during dinner that Lieutenant Colonel Vance approached her table with news. "Captain Kozlov, I need you to report to the wing commander's office at 1900 hours. Class A uniform." Mara looked up, surprised. Orders from the wing commander were unusual. "Did he say what it's about, sir?" "He did not, but you're not in trouble if that's what you're worried about. Just be there on time and squared away." At exactly 1900 hours, Mara presented herself at the wing commander's office. Colonel Sarah Diaz was a fighter pilot by background, F-16s, but she'd spent enough time in joint operations to respect what the A-10 community brought to the fight. She was in her mid-40s, competent, politically savvy in the way senior officers had to be, but not disconnected from tactical realities. "Captain Kozlov, come in. Sit down." Mara took the offered seat, maintaining proper military bearing. "You're probably wondering why I asked you here," Colonel Diaz continued. "Your performance over the past few months has been exemplary. Multiple successful missions, commendations from ground units, and now these awards being processed. You're becoming a known quantity in the close air support community." "Thank you, ma'am. I try to maintain standards." "You exceed them, Captain, which is why I wanted to speak with you personally about something. There's a conference next month at Nellis Air Force Base. Senior leadership from across the Air Force, congressional staffers, defense contractors. The topic is the future of close air support and the A-10's role in that future. They've requested that an operational A-10 pilot attend to provide perspective from the field. I'm sending you." Mara processed this information. A conference at Nellis meant leaving theater, returning to the States temporarily. It meant briefing rooms and PowerPoint presentations instead of flying. It meant being a symbol again instead of a pilot. But it also meant a chance to advocate for the aircraft and mission she believed in. "Ma'am, I'm honored to be selected, but I should tell you I'm not comfortable with public speaking. My strength is in the cockpit, not behind a podium." Colonel Diaz smiled. "I understand that. But here's the thing, Captain. The people trying to retire the A-10 are very comfortable behind podiums. They have sophisticated presentations about cost-benefit ratios and strategic priorities. What they don't have is someone who can speak authentically about what the Warthog does downrange, how it saves lives, why it matters. That's you. That's your voice." She leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to be a politician or a public relations officer. I'm asking you to tell the truth about your experiences. That's all. Let the truth speak for itself." Mara considered this. Put in those terms, it seemed more manageable. Not performance, but testimony. Not advocacy, but honesty. "I can do that, ma'am." "I know you can. We'll get you prepared. Media training, briefing skills, the whole package. You'll have support. But the core message, the authentic experience that comes from you, that's what makes it powerful." The meeting concluded with administrative details and timelines. Mara left feeling a mixture of apprehension and determination. This wasn't the kind of mission she trained for, but it was a mission nonetheless. One that could impact the future of the aircraft and community she devoted herself to. Over the next 2 weeks, she continued flying operational missions while also preparing for the conference. She worked with public affairs officers on her presentation, learning to distill complex tactical scenarios into accessible language without losing the substance. She practiced speaking in front of small groups, getting comfortable with the strange vulnerability of being watched and evaluated for her words rather than her actions. It was harder than flying combat missions in some ways. In the cockpit, she had control. Variables could be calculated, outcomes influenced by skill and decision-making. Behind a podium, she'd be exposed to judgment she couldn't directly counter, opinions she couldn't change through competence alone. But she approached it with the same discipline she brought to everything: preparation, practice, persistence. The fundamentals that had made her a good pilot would serve her here too. Finally, the day came to leave theater. She packed her bags, said temporary goodbyes to her squadron, and caught a flight out of Afghanistan. The journey back to the States was surreal, the usual military transport route through various bases, each one bringing her further from combat and closer to the bureaucratic heart of the Air Force. She arrived at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, home of the weapons school and a hub of tactical aviation excellence. The conference was scheduled to start in 2 days, giving her time to acclimate and finalize her preparation. The night before her presentation, she lay in her quarters at Nellis, staring at the ceiling, running through the speech in her mind. She'd been advised to keep it personal, to use specific examples, to make it real for people who'd never been in combat. She'd tell them about Senior Chief Rourke and his team, about the convoy ambush, about the satisfaction of protecting people who needed protecting. She'd tell them what the A-10 could do that no other aircraft could match. Not because it was faster or stealthier, but because it was designed from the beginning for one specific purpose: close air support. Every system, every design choice, optimized for supporting troops on the ground. She'd tell them why that mattered, why the troops who actually fought preferred the Warthog over sleeker, newer platforms, why retiring the aircraft would leave a gap that couldn't be filled by multi-role fighters designed to do everything but excelling at nothing. She'd tell them the truth. That would have to be enough. The next morning she dressed in her service dress uniform, checked her appearance with military precision, and made her way to the auditorium where the conference was being held. The room was large, filled with senior officers, civilian officials, and others whose faces she didn't recognize but whose power she could sense. Colonel Diaz met her backstage. "How are you feeling, Captain?" "Nervous, ma'am, but ready." "Good. Remember, they need to hear from you. Not because you're a woman, though that's part of the story whether we like it or not, but because you're an expert practitioner of close air support. You've lived it. That authority can't be faked or duplicated. Own it." Mara nodded. She walked onto the stage when introduced, took her position behind the podium, and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment the silence was overwhelming. Then she began to speak. She told them about the night she'd saved Senior Chief Rourke's team, described the tactical situation, the danger close calculations, the precision required. She spoke clearly, without drama or embellishment, letting the facts carry their own weight. She explained what the A-10 brought to that scenario that no other platform could have matched: the ability to fly low and slow, to positively identify targets in difficult conditions, to deliver sustained fire support for extended periods. She talked about the aircraft's survivability, its redundant systems, the titanium bathtub that had brought pilots home with half their aircraft shot away. She described the psychological impact the Warthog had on ground troops, the confidence they felt when they heard that distinctive engine whine, when they knew an A-10 was overhead, the trust that came from decades of the aircraft proving itself in combat. Then she shifted to the human element, talked about the pilots who flew the A-10, the dedication they brought, the specialized skills they developed. She spoke about the crew chiefs who maintained the aircraft, the intelligence personnel who supported the missions, the entire ecosystem built around making close air support effective. "I understand that budget realities require difficult choices," she said, approaching the conclusion. "I understand that new threats require new capabilities, but I would ask you to consider what we'd be giving up if we retire the A-10 without a true replacement. We'd be abandoning the troops on the ground who depend on close air support. We'd be losing institutional knowledge and specialized capabilities that took decades to develop. We'd be making a choice that privileges technology over mission, potential over proven results. She paused, gathering her final thoughts. 3 weeks ago, I was the only thing standing between 6 Navy SEALs and an enemy force that wanted them dead. The A-10 made it possible for me to save those lives. No other aircraft in our inventory could have done that mission the way it needed to be done. That's not nostalgia or resistance to change. That's operational reality. That's what we risk losing. She finished and stepped back from the podium. There was silence for a moment, then applause. Not perfunctory political applause, but something that felt genuine. As she left the stage, several people approached her with questions, comments, requests for more detailed conversations. She handled each interaction with the same straightforward honesty she'd brought to the speech itself. Colonel Diaz found her afterward. "Outstanding, Captain. You gave them something they needed to hear. Whether it changes any minds remains to be seen, but you represented the A-10 community with distinction." "Thank you, ma'am. I hope it helps." "It will. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in obvious ways, but you planted seeds, made people think. That's all we can do." Mara returned to Afghanistan 3 days later, transitioning back into operational tempo with the relief of someone returning to familiar ground. The conference had been important, but this was where she belonged, in the cockpit doing the work. The Warthog was waiting, Ghostfire ready for the next mission. She climbed in, started the engines, and felt the familiar vibration of the aircraft coming to life. The tower cleared her for takeoff. She advanced the throttles and felt the acceleration, the wheels leaving the runway, the moment of transition from earth to sky. Up here, everything made sense. The mission was clear. The tools were proven. The purpose was undeniable. A radio call came in. Troops in contact, requesting close air support. Mara banked toward the coordinates, checking her weapons systems, preparing for another day of protecting those who needed protection. Below, someone was counting on Ghostfire to arrive. She wouldn't disappoint them. She never did. That was the job. That was the calling. That was why she flew. The war continued, days blending into weeks, missions accumulating into a record of professional excellence that spoke louder than any speech. Mara flew when she was needed, maintained her skills when she wasn't, and lived the example that had brought her to that conference stage in the first place. In quiet moments, she thought about her father, about the legacy of service he'd left her, about the aircraft they'd both loved for different reasons but with equal commitment. She thought about the future, uncertain but approaching. The A-10 wouldn't last forever. Nothing did. But while it flew, while pilots climbed into that cockpit and pointed the aircraft toward those who needed help, the mission would continue. And she'd be part of it, for as long as they'd have her, for as long as she could make a difference. That was enough. That had to be enough. Above Afghanistan, as the sun set over ancient mountains, Ghostfire continued her patrol, watchful, ready, lethal when required, protective always, the ghost made of fire. The pilot and aircraft together, writing their story across a sky that remembered everything and forgave nothing. The story wasn't finished, but this chapter was closing.